Brokenness is not weakness, it's an opening that reveals truth, because in the very moments when life knocks us down and strips away the armor we've been wearing, we are given the chance to see ourselves without disguise, without pretense, without the layers we've carried to protect us from world, and it is in that raw and exposed state that the deepest truths emerge, the truths about who we are, what we value, and what truly matters. Brokenness shakes the illusions we cling to, the stories we tell ourselves about control, certainty, and strength, and it forces us to face the reality that life is fragile, unpredictable, and sometimes painfully unfair. Yet it is within that fragility that we find a kind of authenticity that cannot be reached in times of ease. When the cracks appear, when dreams fall apart, when relationships end or losses carve through our hearts, it is tempting to believe that we are ruined, unworthy, or incapable of moving forward, but often those cracks are not the end of us. They are the beginning of seeing more clearly, of noticing the light that can now enter through the spaces that once were sealed. The world teaches us to hide our brokenness, to cover it with smiles, with achievements, with distractions, but if we dare to sit with it instead, to let the pain speak and to listen to what it is showing us, we discover that brokenness is not a verdict but an invitation, an opening into self-compassion, empathy for others, and a deeper resilience than we imagined we possessed. The truth revealed in brokenness is that strength was never about perfection. It was never about keeping it all together. It was never about being untouchable, but about being willing to be undone and still choosing to rise, still choosing to love, still choosing to hope. In our brokenness, we see our shared humanity most clearly because every heart carries scars, every soul knows loss, every life has its fractures, and in acknowledging that truth, we stop pretending and start connecting. Brokenness reveals that the masks we wear to seem strong are far heavier than the weight of admitting our pain, and that in letting them fall, we uncover a freedom we never knew. It shows us that even when pieces are scattered, life can be rebuilt not as it was before, but as something more honest, more tender, more real. The truth is that brokenness does not disqualify us from living fully. It ushers us into a deeper way of being alive, one that embraces both the beauty and the struggle, one that knows the light not just because of its brightness, but because we have walked through the dark. Pain is a teacher. It exposes what comfort often hides, because when everything is easy, smooth, and predictable, we rarely stop to question the deeper patterns of our lives. But when pain enters, whether through loss, disappointment, failure, or betrayal, it strips away the illusions we've been carrying and forces us to confront truths that we might otherwise ignore. Comfort cushions us, makes us believe that the ground beneath us is solid and permanent, but pain shakes that ground and reveals what is unsteady, what is untrue, and what is no longer serving us. Pain has a way of turning our attention inward, demanding that we notice the thoughts, the fears, the unmet needs, and the unresolved wounds that comfort allows us to bury beneath routine and distraction. It teaches us about our strength by showing us the edges of our breaking point. It teaches us about our priorities by revealing what matters when everything else falls apart. And it teaches us about love, compassion, and empathy by allowing us to feel deeply the same ache that others quietly carry. Pain is often the doorway to growth because it cracks open the parts of us that would remain closed if life were only gentle. It makes us humble, reminds us that we are not invincible, and shapes us into people who can stand in truth rather than in illusion. Comfort rarely challenges us to change, but pain does because it makes denial impossible and demands that we pay attention to the lessons hidden in the hurt. When we look closely, we see that pain refines us the way fire refines gold. It burns away what is false and leaves behind what is real. In the silence of suffering, we come face to face with ourselves without the distractions, and though it is terrifying to be that honest, it is also liberating because we discover both our fragility and our resilience. Pain exposes where we have been settling, where we have been pretending, where we have been avoiding truths that could set us free, and it pushes us toward healing, transformation, and growth, even if at first all we want is relief. It teaches us patience because healing takes time. It teaches us surrender because we cannot control every outcome. And it teaches us courage because choosing to move forward after being broken is one of the bravest decisions a human can make. Pain may not be invited, but once it arrives, it leaves us changed, wiser, and more awake to life in all its complexity, revealing lessons that comfort could never uncover. Courage is born in the ruins. Strength is forged in the very moments we want to escape, because it is in those seasons when everything we thought we could rely on has crumbled that we are pushed to discover a deeper power within ourselves, a power that often remains hidden in times of ease and safety. When life feels intact and predictable, we do not need to summon bravery, but when we find ourselves standing in the rubble of broken plans, shattered dreams, or unexpected loss, the choice to keep moving becomes the birthplace of true courage. It is not about denying the pain or pretending that the ruins do not ache. It is about facing the ache head on, breathing through the fear, and deciding to take even the smallest step forward despite the heaviness pressing against our chest. The ruins test us. They strip away the comforts and the illusions, and in that stripped-down place we are forced to see who we are at our core, beyond the titles, the achievements, or the expectations. Strength is not built in the absence of struggle, but in the fire of it, when we want nothing more than to run away, to hide, to numb ourselves from the reality before us, yet something inside whispers, stay, endure, rise. These are the moments that shape us, not the easy victories, but the battles that leave scars and stories etched into our being. Courage does not roar in these moments. Sometimes it barely whispers, yet even that whisper is enough to keep us alive, enough to remind us that what looks like an ending can become the soil for a new beginning. The ruins teach us that strength is not about control, but about surrendering to what we cannot change while holding fiercely to what we can. Our choices, our values, our will to rise again. Each time we face the ruins, we learn that survival is not just about enduring, but about allowing ourselves to be transformed, because ruins are not simply places of destruction. They are places of rebuilding, where courage lays the first brick and strength carries it forward. What we fear most in those moments is often what frees us, because walking through devastation shows us that we are far more resilient than we ever imagined, and that the ruins do not define the end of our story. They define the beginning of our becoming. Resilience is not bouncing back. It's becoming new. You don't return to who you were. You grow into someone stronger, because the very experience of struggle, loss, or failure changes you in ways that make it impossible to simply rewind to the person you once were. And instead of longing for the past, resilience invites you to step into a new version of yourself, shaped by what you have endured. When life knocks you down, the scars you carry are not just reminders of the pain. They are proof that you survived, that you faced what felt unendurable and still found a way to move forward. And in that survival, something within you is stretched, widened, and deepened. To bounce back would mean returning unchanged, but resilience is not about returning. It is about transforming, about taking the broken pieces and arranging them into a new mosaic that may look different but holds a beauty of its own. Struggles carve out space for empathy, for wisdom, for gratitude, and for a kind of strength that cannot be taught by comfort or ease. And though we may not see it while we are in the middle of the storm, on the other side we realize we have become someone with a richer capacity for living. Growth is rarely born from what goes smoothly. It is born from what tests us, what challenges our identity, what forces us to confront our limits and then exceed them. Resilience is the quiet power of choosing not to be defined by what happened to us, but to be refined through it, of choosing not to let pain shrink us, but to let it expand us, of choosing not to cling to who we were, but to lean into who we are becoming. It teaches us that strength is not rigidity but flexibility, the ability to bend without breaking, to shift and adapt, to grow in directions we never imagined. And as we embrace this process, we realize that the person we are today is not less than who we were before the hardship, but more aware, more courageous, more capable of holding both joy and sorrow in the same breath. Resilience doesn't erase the struggle, it weaves it into the fabric of our being so that we carry both the memory of pain and the wisdom it gave us. To become new is to honor the past without being imprisoned by it, to let the hardship shape us but not define us, and to step forward knowing that we may still feel the ache of what was lost, but also the strength of what was gained. In this way, resilience is not a return but a rebirth. The courage to embrace transformation, and the humility to recognize that every hardship has the potential to grow us into someone stronger, wiser, and more alive than we ever were before. Connection grows from shared scars. Healing deepens when we allow others to see the cracks, because the moments we choose to open ourselves and reveal the places where life has hurt us are often the very moments where real closeness begins, as honesty creates a bridge that no amount of perfection or performance could ever build. We live in a world that often teaches us to hide our wounds, to cover up our struggles with smiles and strength, to present only the parts of ourselves that seem polished and intact. Yet it is in the exposure of what feels broken that we meet each other in the most authentic way. Scars tell stories, and when we share those stories, we remind one another that none of us walks through life untouched by loss, disappointment, or failure, and that shared humanity is what dissolves the walls of loneliness that so many quietly carry. Healing is rarely a solitary process. While self-reflection and personal growth matter, the deepest healing often occurs in the presence of others who bear witness to our pain without judgment, who say with their presence, "Me too," or "I understand," or simply, "You are not alone." The cracks we fear will make us unworthy are often the very places where compassion seeps in, where someone else's experience touches ours. And suddenly the weight we thought was ours alone feels lighter because it is carried together. When we dare to reveal the scars instead of hiding them, we create a space of courage and trust where others feel safe to reveal their own, and in that mutual unveiling, connection deepens and healing multiplies. It is not the flawless parts of us that invite closeness, but the fragile ones, not the chapters filled with triumphs, but the ones written with tears and endurance, because those are the chapters everyone can recognize in their own way. Shared scars do not mean identical stories, but they carry the same language of struggle, survival, and resilience, and that shared language binds us together more powerfully than surface-level interactions ever could. To let others see our cracks is not a sign of weakness but of strength, because it requires courage to stand uncovered and trust that someone will honor what they see. And when they do, the bond created in that moment often becomes unshakable. Healing deepens because in that connection we no longer feel isolated in our suffering. We feel understood, and being understood is one of the greatest medicines for the human heart. Scars are evidence that we have been wounded but not destroyed, and when we place those scars side by side with another's, we begin to see that healing is not just about mending alone, but about walking together, sharing the weight of the journey, and realizing that our cracks do not make us less, they make us real, and in being real, we give both ourselves and others the freedom to heal. Hope is a choice, not a feeling. Even in the darkest chapters, we can decide to rise, because hope is not something that simply appears when circumstances are easy or favorable. It is something we choose to hold on to even when everything around us seems to argue against it. Feelings come and go with the weight of our circumstances, but choice is deliberate, and in moments of despair, when grief is heavy or failure feels final, choosing hope is the quiet act of defiance that says, "This is not the end of me." Hope does not deny the darkness or pretend the pain is not real. Rather, it acknowledges the reality of the moment while refusing to let that reality define the future. It is a decision we make in the silence after tears, in the aftermath of loss, in the slow rebuilding after everything has crumbled. And though it does not instantly erase the struggle, it plants a seed that eventually pushes through the soil of despair. Hope is not loud, it rarely comes with fanfare, but it whispers to us that tomorrow can be different from today, that healing is possible even when wounds are deep, that joy can return even when sorrow seems endless. In our darkest chapters, hope becomes the compass that keeps us from wandering aimlessly, the anchor that steadies us in the storm, and the spark that ignites resilience when exhaustion tempts us to give up. Choosing hope is an act of courage because it means believing in possibilities we cannot yet see and trusting that our efforts to rise will matter, even when evidence is scarce. It is easier to surrender to despair, to let the darkness close in, but hope insists that we have a say in our story, that the chapter we are living is not the final page. When we choose hope, we choose to rise, perhaps not all at once and not without struggle, but step by step, breath by breath, until light begins to seep back into our days. Hope is not a feeling we wait for, it is a decision we make daily, sometimes moment by moment, to keep going, to keep believing, to keep reaching for the life that lies beyond the shadows. And though the path may be long, the choice to hope transforms us, shaping our character, sharpening our strength, and reminding us that no matter how broken or lost we may feel, we are not powerless. We can rise again, and in rising, we create a future that pain alone could never take from us.